Yep, there's no camera, but we do need quiet because we're going to start the broadcast.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jay Rempe with Nebraska Farm Bureau, broadcasting live from the Big Red Room in our home office here. Welcome to our third webinar, our National and State Issues Update webinar. Thank you for joining us. Sitting here in the room this afternoon with me are Jay Ferris, Carl Linke, Jordan Dux, Anthony Arts, and Rob Robertson is joining us as well. Unfortunately, our president, Steve Nelson, is on a Meat Export Federation trip into Peru and Panama this week, so he's unable to join us. So I think what we'll do, we will go ahead and get started here. I'll turn it over to Jay Ferris for just a second to give us some instructions on the webinar and how you go about asking questions, and then we'll turn it over to Jordan Dux to start giving us a national issues update. So Jay, take it away.
Okay, well, first of all, as Jay Rempe mentioned, thank you everyone for being on this webinar this afternoon. Hopefully you are enjoying lunch as we are here in Lincoln. Just a couple of housekeeping items and directions. Hopefully everybody will be able to hear us over their speakers on their computer, or there is the number you can dial in as well. If you have a question, if you have a microphone at your computer, if you are on the phone, all you simply need to do is raise your hand. There's a little icon that looks like a hand. Click on that. I will see that. I will unmute your microphone so you can ask your question. Additionally, you can also type your question into the question box. I will see that, and we will ask your question of the presenter at that time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan.
There we go. Can folks hear me a little better? All right, sorry about that. Well, we're running down to exactly what I just said a second ago. We're going to start out talking with some regulations, some federal regulations, mainly starting off with the Spill Prevention Control and Countermeasure Regulation, SPCCC. There's a lot of confusion running around about this particular regulation, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And we'll talk about the rule itself, then we'll talk about some legislative efforts that are going on this rule as well. Starting out, you know, the rule kind of breaks down into two tiers. The first one is Tier 1, which would be for folks if they have 1,320 gallons to 10,000 gallons of fuel storage capacity on their farm. And that's just capacity. That's not, you know, if you have an empty tank you don't use anymore, that still counts. So if you have combined fuel storage capacity of 1,320 to 10,000 gallons on your farm, and that goes all the way down to a 55-gallon container, if you have that at any one location, you would fit into Tier 1. Which you would need to have a SPCC, Spill Prevention Control and Countermeasure plan. If you're in that range of 1,320 to 10,000, you can self-certify. And so you can go through, you can go onto the EPA website. They have a template that's available online, and you can just come up with your plan. This is not a plan that you have to give to the EPA. This is just a plan that you have to have on file and utilize if you were to have a spill. If you have fuel storage of, if you have any tank on your farm that is above 5,000 gallons, and you're still under that 10,000 mark, you cannot use the template, but you will have to come up with your own plan. That EPA has some example plans on their website as well. EPA has not made this easy for folks. They have all these different little pieces here and there, but that's where you're at. Lastly, I think the most important part and probably the most costly part of this whole regulation is that secondary containment would likely be a part of that SPCC plan. You would need to have secondary containment around those tanks in order to have a plan that EPA would accept. Now, the important part of this is that if you go back up a little bit to that Tier 1 part and you read through to Tier 1, fuel storage capacity down to 55-gallon containers of 1,320 to 10,000 with a reasonable expectation of a spill going into waters of the U.S. Now, this is where some confusion has happened. So basically for folks that need to be in compliance with this rule, there needs to be the expectation that if you were to have a tank spill, that spill would go into a water of the U.S. From our conversations with EPA and with our conversations with the EPA Region 7 Administrator and their staff, it would be extraordinarily difficult for farms to qualify for that exception. And so really, EPA is going to look at this particular part very liberally. I know over the past couple of years we've talked about this waters of the U.S. issue with regards to the Clean Water Act, on how when you use that phrase, it means basically water puddles, it means ditches, it means locations where water only collects momentarily or even seasonally. That would count. Not just rivers, not just streams or a creek. It's virtually anything where water can collect. And so with EPA's definition of that, it is our understanding, and again, the way when we've talked to EPA and what they've told us is they're going to look at that very, very liberally. And so it would be very difficult for a farmer to hit that exemption. And so, again, going back to if you have 1,320 to 10,000 gallons of fuel storage capacity on your farm at any one location, you would need to be in compliance with this rule. I don't have the date on here, but compliance with this rule, it's been delayed for 2 years. You folks were actually originally supposed to be in compliance by in 2010. We did get a delay, and folks need to be in compliance by May 11th, 10th or 11th. I can't remember exactly the date. It's right there at the beginning of May of this year. Moving down to Tier 2. So if you fit into that 1,320 to 10,000, you can self-certify. Going down to Tier 2, if you have fuel storage capacity, again, down to a 55-gallon container at any one location at above 10,000 gallons, with a reasonable expectation that a spill, if one were to occur, would go into the waters of the U.S., you need to have that plan certified with a licensed and professional engineer. Secondary containment, again, would be a part of that plan, and the engineer would work through that. But again, on that lower level, you don't need to have an engineer certify your plan. If you're on the level that's above 10,000 gallons, you must have a licensed engineer certify your plan. Again, you're not sending anything into EPA, but you have to have that plan on file if a spill were to occur. And EPA would be involved, and they would come then. If you did have a spill occur, you would have to show EPA your SPCC plan. And so this is where this whole thing comes in, where you don't have to send it into EPA, but if a spill were to occur and there would be an environmental problem, EPA would come and inspect and ask whether or not they wanted to see your SPCC plan. That would be a part of it. I have lastly on this slide, the cost for the use of an engineer would run anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000 to certify your plan. This is the estimates that we've been getting from engineers in Nebraska. The $2,000 figure is if, even though you can self-certify, if you wanted to make sure that everything was 100% correct on that Tier 1 level, that's the $2,000 level, and then $4,000 would be on that Tier 2 level. So this is the regulation as we understand it. Again, you folks would need to be in compliance by early May of this year. This is something we've dealt with for the past couple years, and so we've tried to work with and try to gather information for folks from farmers out there to understand how big of a regulation this would be. And this kind of takes you to the next part, is we have supported for the past few years legislation to fix this. SPCC, the Spill Prevention Control and Countermeasure Regulation, was developed in the 1970s to focus in on large oil storage units. Oil refineries, gas stations, airports, that's what it was originally intended. That's who it was originally intended to affect. A couple years ago, the EPA said, well, agriculture is not specifically exempt in the rule, and thus it needs to be brought into it. And this is where we have this due date of early May for folks to come into compliance. We have been supporting legislation to increase that level, that fuel level in which you'd be exempt from the rule. 1,320 gallons, in our opinion, is not nearly enough when you look at the amount of fuel storage that farms and ranches have today. And so in the Senate, we've been supporting the Fuels Act, the Farmers Undertake Environmental Land Stewardship Act. The bill was introduced just actually last week and was co-sponsored, originally co-sponsored by Senator Fisher and Senator Johans. They've been very supportive of the effort here, and we're hoping we can get this particular piece of legislation attached to a piece of legislation moving forward. On the House side, again, a similar bill was introduced. It's called the same thing, the Fuels Act. It's H.R. 311. I don't think there's a bill number attached to the Senate bill yet. But H.R. 311 on the House side, Congressman Terry and Congressman Smith are co-sponsors of this particular piece of legislation. Congressman Fortenberry has not yet signed on, and we will continue to push him to do so. The thing that I will say to folks as they think about SPCC is that the EPA, again, you're not having to send this plan into EPA, and I'm not telling producers to not be in compliance, but I will tell you that we are continuing to try to work on a piece of legislation to prevent folks in that 1,300 to 10,000 gallon level from having to come into compliance. Again, the effective date will still happen in May, and I don't see this piece of legislation being passed before that date. But I will tell you again that we are trying to get this level fixed. The Fuels Act would essentially raise that minimum, that Tier 1 level, to 10,000 gallons, from 1,320 up to 10,000 gallons, and then Tier 2 would begin at 42,000 gallons before you'd actually have to have a professional engineer come in and certify your plan. You could self-certify at 10,000 to under 42,000, and then 42 and up. You'd be fit into that Tier 2. That's what we're trying to do. Again, we're not trying to exempt agriculture. We think politically it's very tough to do that, and so we've tried to find a common sense way to approach this rule, and this is the approach that we've taken, and hopefully we can try to get this passed. If you have any SPCC questions, please don't hesitate to let me know on this call, and I'll try to answer those as best as we can. I will also say, just for the folks on this one, if you have questions about SPCC and you are interested, Farm Bureau will be conducting a webinar. We're going to send out dates very soon for that, but we will conduct a webinar with EPA to answer any questions that folks may have on SPCC toward the end of March. And so we'll have an EPA, one of the EPA SPCC inspectors on the webinar that'll talk about the rule and talk about any issues that folks may have or any questions that they'll have. But before then, if you have any questions today, also please feel free to ask me those. I want to move on real quick and talk sequestration very quickly, because I know this has been something, and really the federal budget. Jay's waving me down.
We do have a question, it looks like.
You do have an SPCC question.
Yeah.
Well, we can ask that. Why don't we get that one done before we...
Okay, and it's coming from Jeff, so I'm going to unmute Jeff Metz's microphone. So we'll see if, Jeff, are you on? He may have just raised his hand inadvertently. So, Jeff, if you do have a question, you can go ahead and type it in. And did you see? Adam, did you see that one?
No, I did not.
Okay. We did have one, and it was on what senators or are there any senators pushing to change that amount from 5,000 to 10,000 gallons on the SPCC rule?
So, again, what the Fuels Act would do, and let me go back here. What the Fuels Act would do is bump that level, basically. So you have these two tiers again. You have Tier 1, which is 1,320 to 10. And Tier 2 is 10,000, is above 10,000. What the Fuels Act would do is increase Tier 1 to 10,000 gallons, and Tier 2 would be increased to 42,000 gallons. So everything would still be the same. SPCC folks would still need to come into compliance, but all we're trying to do is increase that regulatory threshold from 1320 up to 10,000 gallons before you'd have to certify an SPCC plan. And then on Tier 2, before you would have to have a professional engineer come in and charge you $4,000 to come up with a plan, you would have to have 42,000 gallons of capacity on at any one location on your farm. All right. So feel free to ask more questions as we move forward. Here. But I want to.
I do have one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Let me get this over. Okay. The question is, what are the penalties for noncompliance with SPCC?
If you were to have a spill, and EPA were to come in and they would ask you if there was, say, a fish kill, that you had a spill that leaked into a water of the U.S. and it caused problems, and EPA were to come back at you and say, okay, let me see your SPCC plan, and if you didn't have one, the fine would run into the thousands of dollars a day, tens of thousands of dollars per day that you did not have a plan. I'm not saying that just to scare people, because I will also let you know that EPA has a budget to do 100 SPCC checks every year of the 5,000 large oil facilities that are in the Region 7 region, which is 4 states. They can do 100. They do 100 checks per year of the 5,000, and the 5,000 number does not include farms or ranches. And they have not done an inspection check on a farm or ranch. I'm not saying that they won't, but they never have yet. And farms technically haven't been a part of this, so that's part of the reason they haven't done it yet. But they tend to focus in on oil refineries and larger oil facilities. Again, I'm not saying that they won't knock on your door, but they tend to focus in on the larger end of things. So it's our hope that we can try to get this piece of legislation passed before this becomes an issue, where folks would maybe have a compliance check, is what I would say. It's not a very good answer, and I know that everyone wants me to say, you know, don't come into compliance, and folks, I wish I could say you don't need to worry about it, but I can't do that, because as soon as I say that, EPA is going to knock on your door and ask for your plan, and we're going to have issues. I think both you and us will have issues. So that's where, you know, we will try as best we can, and we will continue to push as hard as we can to get this bill passed. But until then, that's the law as it reads today, right there. And we're going to make this available in our newspaper. We're also going to make this available on our website, so folks can see the rundown of the rule itself. But the EPA has a very good, really, it's for EPA, it's a pretty self-explanatory website dealing with SPCC and agriculture's compliance needed for SPCC. All right, we're going to move forward here. I want to talk a little bit about budget just very quickly. As you all know, sequestration happened on March 1st. The lights still came on, the sun still came up, and we haven't seen a really large cut. Really, the only thing we've seen so far in terms of immediate impact is the shutdown of the White House to tours. But supposedly that might get fixed even today, so we'll see how that even goes as we move forward. But sequestration, again, we're still working under this cut, the significant cut over 10 years of $1.2 trillion, and the total cuts for 2013. So for this year, they will trim $85 billion. USDA is a part of that. That $85 billion is technically across the board, even though across the board all parts of the federal budget are not created equal. That does not affect federal crop insurance. The cuts do not affect direct payments. They don't affect large contractual programs. They also don't affect the SNAP program, but they will affect the Women, Infant, Children program, that part of the nutrition title. So it's not every single piece of the federal budget is created equal on this $85 billion across-the-board cut. But the one thing that we've been very active on, as you've seen, congressional folks been very active on the USDA side, is this supposed furlough or cut of federal meat inspectors. Senator Johanns and Senator Senator Fisher have been very active on this, as well as our House members, but I think Senator Johans has been kind of leading the way on this whole thing in terms of talking about the problems with cutting USDA meat inspectors and the problems that go into that, and what it means for the food supply, what it means for livestock producers generally. And so we have been very clear. President Nelson submitted a letter to the President, as well as Harry Reid and Speaker Boehner, talking about what that would mean for the beef and pork and poultry industry, the livestock industry, cutting off the federal meat inspectors. And so we're going to continue to try to work on that. And I will say that it's even though Secretary Vilsack says different, it is our opinion that the sequestration provides flexibility, that USDA should be able to go through this, or at least should have been able to go through this, without cuts to federal meat inspectors, as they've always been deemed essential personnel. So that's one thing to remember on that front. The real impact date that folks need to remember is March 27th. This March 1st date that came and passed, we didn't see a whole lot, but the real date is March 27th, and that's when the federal government runs out of money. That's when you're seeing Congress right now work on a CR, a continuing resolution. You've got the House that submitted a budget earlier this week. The Senate, for the first time in 4 years, is submitting a budget, and they released a budget. And so they're working on that one. The federal government again runs out of money on the 27th, and the reason that's the real impact date is because that's where the cuts are going to also be made. That's where you're going to see more cuts, or how they're going to work within sequestration and what cuts will be made. That's an important date. The other thing I would say is this does directly affect the Farm Bill, and there's a couple reasons for that. And one of the main reasons is that there have been attempts to try to, before sequestration actually kicked in March 1st, there was an attempt to try to delay sequestration, paying for that delay, that 10-month delay, with cuts to direct payments, some military spending, and then tax increases. So Congress was essentially, over on the Senate side, asking agriculture to absorb really a third of the overall cost of delaying it for only 10 months, and again getting rid of direct payments as a way to pay for that. In our opinion, that only delays and really hampers the ag folks' ability to try to get a new farm bill passed. We've been supportive of getting rid of direct payments, but we want to use that spending and use that money that is in the direct payment program. We can obviously give some of that to the effort to try to trim federal spending, but we want to try to come up with some new programs, some better programs that we think will help farmers more, but will also be more fiscally responsible. And so trying to use the direct payments just as a way to pay for sequestration, or a delay in sequestration, was something we did not support. And that March 27th date is also going to be important for the Farm Bill, because that's when I think the ag folks are going to get their marching orders as to when and how much they need to cut from this next Farm Bill. We're going to try to deal with it again. We're going to try to get a Farm Bill passed yet this year. That is our hope. It was our hope last year to get one done. It is continuing to be our hope to try to get something done yet this year, if we can, because the budget scenario looks very different than it did last year. You may have seen some of the news stories talking about the CBO scores that just were updated for the Senate and House passed Farm Bill. The numbers went down drastically. It didn't cut as much as they thought it would, with just the way we look at the budget for this year. The Senate Farm Bill really trimmed about half as much as they wanted to, and the House was not quite as much. But the cuts that they made didn't add up as much as they thought it would. So it's going to be imperative for us to try to get a Farm Bill done yet this year. Over on the Senate side, the 2012 Farm Bill that was passed by the entire Senate was introduced again. As I said before, the budget numbers will most likely be decided during this CR discussion, or during this discussion of trying to possibly come up with a grand bargain. That's the phrase being used by the President and some members of Congress to try to come up with a spending / tax code overhaul or alteration scenarios. So that's probably not going to be the ag folks that are going to decide how much money they need to spend and how much money they need to cut, but it's probably going to be the House and Senate leadership. The timeline remains very unclear as this whole process with the federal budget and everything moves forward. When we see a farm bill actually go and work through the Ag Committee, it remains yet to be seen. They're going to try to work on it this early summer, late spring, is the reports that we've heard. And I know the Senate will most likely, like they did last year, move first, and they will probably get it through the Senate Ag Committee. Now, whether they can get it through passed on the floor is a larger question, but I don't see the problems there on the Senate side as much as I do on the House side. Dairy and nutrition is the key disagreement on the House side. I have dairy as a key one, and then I list SNAP as well. You know, dairy, the Speaker does not like the new dairy program. And as I've said on this call, this webinar a couple times, if folks want to ask me questions about dairy, I'm more than willing to do that, but I'll maybe skip over it and just say that it's politically one of the larger problems that remains on the House side. On the Senate side, moving forward on the SNAP program, the disagreements on how much to cut from that program and how much that differs with the Senate is another key disagreement. And then the timeline is also unclear. I said the Senate will probably move forward with their bill in the late spring, early summer. The House will probably attempt to do that. It'll probably be more so into the summer before they work on a bill. But they want to make sure that the work they do that they are actually doing something, that they'll actually see a farm bill move forward before they really go through and do all the work to come up with a piece of legislation. So I think uncertainty is still the name of the game when it comes to trying to pass a farm bill either on the House side or the Senate side. And that's it for me. And I guess we can ask if there are some more questions on any of the stuff that I've gone over. Why don't we ask the questions now on the national stuff, and then we'll turn it over to the state guys to talk about some of the things happening over in the legislature.
Okay, see if we have any questions. I did have a comment. And the comment actually is, why don't we just lock up the Senate and the House like they do the conclave until they reach a real budget deal?
Wait till the white smoke comes out. Yeah. That may not be a bad idea. I think you'd find a lot of folks that wouldn't disagree with that idea either.
Okay, I see Stan Rosendahl has a question. I've got your mic unmuted. Stan, are you there?
Yeah, Jay.
Okay.
Jordan. I just had a comment and a question kind of on the meat inspectors deal there. I know, 10, 12, 15 years ago, the meat inspectors really got out of inspecting the meat where they put a HACCP plan on every plant, had to have their own HACCP plan. So where the meat inspectors actually inspect the HACCP plan and make sure you're following it and all that stuff. So I think basically at that time it was to take the liability off the federal government and put it back on the plant itself because it had a HACCP plan now. So my comment is, so what's the big deal? Why can't these plants operate their HACCP plan and just say bye-bye to the meat inspectors until they get their stuff figured out? But that's just the comment I had.
Well, Stan, that's a fair observation, because you look at one of the things that's been interesting is not only just that issue as to what obviously the meat inspectors need to certify a product it needs to be USDA inspected in order for it to cross the border of any particular state. So that's obviously the importance of that. But the interesting thing in terms of what impact this would really have, in the letter that Senator Johans just issued to Secretary of ILSAC this week, he asked the Secretary, earlier last year, you made requests for additional funding for a couple of other programs, and yet the meat inspection was not a part of that. And so if this is such a big deal, why didn't you make a request? If this is such a big deal, why didn't you make a request for Congress to authorize you to spend a little more to prevent those cuts from happening? It's turning into a little bit of a political football in D.C. on this meat inspector end, and I think a lot of these things are considered worst-case scenario. You listen to the talks about the trimming of over 800,000 civilian employees of the Defense Department being furloughed and cut, and so it's been an interesting display of partisanship and politics when you look at what this has done. And unfortunately, the meat inspectors have been a part of that, and that's really too bad.
Okay, we do have another question. And Jordan, what is known about the proposed new EPA administrator?
So Gina McCarthy was kind of the main one that dealt with air regulations, I believe. And there was, I mean, really, I'll guess I'll speak pretty frankly. If folks thought that this was going to get better in terms of the regulatory pressure that EPA is putting on farms and ranches, if you really thought that was going to happen under this administration, I mean, this administrator will probably disappoint you, because she's going to probably continue on with the same you know, specialty that Lisa Jackson continued to work under. Her focus will be the key as to how much pressure she'll put on certain aspects, whether it be clean air, clean water, or other little pet projects she may have. And so in terms of any relief in sight, I don't think that'll probably happen. And now the administration has 4 more years to be there. They're going to try to work on as many environmental issues as they can. So unfortunately, that's as much as we know about this new EPA administrator. She will continue on the same path, most likely, that Lisa Jackson did. So we will probably continue to work on and probably be defenders more than we were, or just the same as we have been, working against regulations rather than you know, trying to come up with maybe more positive pieces of legislation. Defending against regulation may be one of the larger things we do and continue to do.
Okay, any other questions for Jordan? I don't see any other questions right now at this time, so we are going to turn it over to Jay Rempe. And once again, if anybody does have a question, if you came on late, all you simply have to do, if you have a microphone on your computer, you can simply raise your hand. I'll unmute your microphone. You can also type in. There's a place for questions that you can type in your question, and we can. I will ask the presenter that question as well. So with that, I think we'll go over to Jay Rempe.
All right, thank you, Jay. Anthony and I are going to tag team real quick and talk about a couple state issues that we've been working on over the last couple of weeks. First one I'll visit with you briefly about is LB 354. It's a corn checkoff bill that was introduced by Senator Tyson Larson, and it would go about changing the corn checkoff program in a number of ways and kind of reform the program and how it operates today. First, it would go in, and I put quasi-agency on the slide. One of the things it would do would be separate out the corn checkoff program from and kind of be a quasi-public agency and give it a little more latitude, a little more freedom in some of the things that it wants to do. The bill would also provide for an elected board, and then the checkoff would continue to be mandatory, but there would be a refund provision put in the bill for anybody that wanted to seek a refund. And I think, if I remember right, the provisions of the bill call for a refund within, or apply for that refund by 60 days from paying the checkoff. But those are all elements of the program that is consistent with Farm Bureau policy and things we support. The hearing on the bill was 2 or 3 weeks ago. And Farm Bureau, along with a number of other groups, went in and testified in support of the measure. One question or concern that we had, our policy also imposes using checkoff dollars for lobbying. And so over the past 2 or 3 weeks, there has been a lot of discussion about lobbying by the Corn Checkoff Board. Right now, under current law, the board is prevented from lobbying at the state level, from contributing to any political campaign or activities, but it does allow lobbying on federal legislation, and they could use up to 25% of their funds for lobbying at the federal legislation. Our policy opposes any kind of lobbying, so we've been part of those discussions, and just last week reached an agreement with all the parties involved that lobbying will be, any mention of lobbying and federal lobbying will be removed from the bill, and instead there will be, it should be regulations, not regulators, regulations governing the activities of the Corn Board that Senator Larson has kind of led the efforts and directed, it has drafted, that we all agreed to. And what it would do would say that it would provide some guidelines, I guess, if you will, in terms of activities of the Corn Board related to marketing, promotion, and research, and any federal legislation that they could provide some information, background materials, research, or education to federal officials to make an informed decision on a particular issue, like it would be a trade agreement that might affect the corn markets, or ethanol issues as far as you know, demand utilization of corn, those kind of activities that they can provide information and make an informed research effort, but they couldn't politically advocate for a position on a bill or legislation or regulation. That bill, as our understanding, was reported or voted out of committee yesterday, and it's our understanding it's going to be made a priority bill. Senators have until Friday of this week to designate priority bills, and we understand this bill will be, it's our understanding, it designated a priority bill, so it will definitely receive some time on the floor. The other issue that I wanted to visit with you a little bit about, excuse me, is LB 517. It's Senator Tom Carlson's bill that deals with water funding. He actually introduced two different bills that dealt with water funding, LB 517 and LB 516. LB 517 is a little more of a short-term measure in that the latest draft of it, and the committee, Natural Resources Committee, is supposed to take up this bill this afternoon and talk about it, but it would create a 25-member task force. 13 members of those will be existing Natural Resources Commission members, which that commission already exists. Added to that would be 10 members appointed by the governor to represent a broad perspective of water interests and geographic interests within the state. And then there would be 2 additional members. The chair of the Natural Resources Committee and the head of the Department of Natural Resources would also serve on the task force. This would be a short-lived task force. It would only exist until February of next year. And the basic purpose of the task force over the next few months, by the end of the year, is to come up with a roadmap of funding needs related to water. And they will do this in 4 broad areas. They would look at the needs within research, data and modeling, and data gathering and those kind of efforts, conjunctive and integrated management that the department and NRDs are already working on, needs related to not only compact compliance but interstate agreements and cooperative agreements. What are some things that need to be done in the way for Nebraska to meet its obligations under those agreements? And then infrastructure. We've got a lot of infrastructure in the state of Nebraska that is you know, surface water systems and other systems out there that are aging, and we have some maintenance and construction needs there. So the idea behind the task force, there's been a lot of data gathering or needs gathering, I guess, if you will, over the last couple of years. And the thought is the task force is to take all this information, and the legislation spells out some things it needs to look at in terms of prioritization of these needs into these 4 broad areas, and come back with a roadmap to the legislature next year and say, okay, here are the funding needs, here are the priorities where we need to spend money over the next 3 or 4 years. And then also part of it would be to recommend a group or a system or process or procedure to carry that out into the long term and continually to revise and revamp the needs as obviously the state's dynamics change in terms of our needs out there, and to set up a system for the future. That's a lot to ask of a task force in a short-lived time, and so part of the effort of the bill will be to give the task force and the Department of Natural Resources some dollars available that they can hire some consultants and facilitators to do the grunt work, if you will, behind this, and the task force will set the overall parameters. So those are the 2 issues that I was going to talk about real quick, and let me turn it over to Anthony to run through a few issues, and then we'll take some questions.
All right, thanks, Jay. So another area where Farm Bureau has been focusing its energies this year is in the promotion of livestock development. And LB 550 was introduced by Senator Ken Shields this year. We strongly support that bill. What it would basically do is provide some material incentives for folks who are willing to undertake basically investment in livestock expansion. One area that it would do this in would be to provide no interest loan program for counties to expand their infrastructure in order to accommodate new livestock developments, and it would also increase the amount of tax credits that are available to help support individuals who invest in livestock development. The Agriculture Committee heard testimony on this bill on February 12th. It enjoyed a fair amount of support from livestock producer groups and also county groups. The bill is still in the committee, and I think there is a feeling out there that before it would be kicked out, we just want to make sure we would have all of our ducks in the row and be able to answer any questions that would come up if the bill were on the floor. And so some of the policy challenges that exist with this bill is basically getting together information on the economic impact of these potential livestock expansions, and sort of in the same vein using that hard data to win buy-in from urban senators, and then also identifying funding sources for both the loan program and also to increase the tax credits available. Farm Bureau is also sort of exploring whether there would be existing funds available in the Department of Economic Development that could potentially be used to incentivize livestock development, and perhaps even, I guess, more significantly in terms of how our state sort of appears in terms of welcoming new livestock expansion projects. Last Friday, the Nebraska Supreme Court issued an opinion in what I guess is known as the Todd Tolles dairy case. Mr. Tolles owns two extremely large dairies in western Butler County, and during the construction of his more recent one ran into trouble with the township where it was located. They had passed two regulations, one that basically regulated livestock waste, and the other one which had regulations which were specific to large animal confinements, setbacks, planning for 25-year storms, manure spills, those sorts of things. The Supreme Court actually ruled against Mr. Tolles and basically agreed with the lower court's ruling that the township in Butler County did have the statutory authority to issue these regulations, and that the regulations were not preempted by state laws or regulations, and so therefore they were valid. And so I guess in terms of, you know, local regulation of livestock developments, the Supreme Court affirmed that those entities, those political subdivisions, do in fact have that power. And so we'll continue to follow that those developments as well. Moving along, I just wanted to give you a really brief update on the tax reform discussions that were happening. As you know, Farm Bureau came out in strong opposition to the governor's bills, LB 405 and 406. Those bills were eventually killed by the Revenue Committee. I guess where things stand now is LB 613 is basically being discussed as a potential vehicle through which discussions around tax reform in Nebraska could continue during the interim period after session ends here. And that bill has been advanced to the general file. As it currently stands, it would create a commission which would sort of lead these tax study and reform discussions. That commission would consist of the 8 members of the Revenue Committee, the chairman of the Ag Committee, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, the chairman of the Health and Human Services Committee, and the chairman of the Planning Committee. And so Farm Bureau, if those discussions do in fact occur over the interim, will be involved in them, and we will continue to push for property taxes, the removal of sale tax on repair parts, inheritance taxes, all those issues that are important to farmers and ranchers. We'll continue to push that they be included as part of those discussions. And then finally, I was going to give a quick update on the status of some of the brand bills that were introduced this year. There was a slew of them. LB 60 would remove Knox County from the brand inspection area. That still is in committee. LB 654 would increase the brand inspection area statewide. That one is still in committee. There's LB 647, which establishes the brand as an acceptable form of animal ID. LB 587 changes some definitions in terms of proof of ownership for cattle. And LB 437 basically says for cattle that are going to be imminently exported from Nebraska, individual can apply to the brand inspector and receive authority to use an out-of-state brand permit. The only one of those brand bills that has been advanced out of the Agricultural Committee this year is the one dealing with out-of-state brand permits. And at this point in time, it's our understanding that none of the other four are actually going to be advanced this year. So that pretty much wraps up my presentation on the state issues.
Okay, so I'm opening it up for questions for either Jay or Anthony. Anthony does have the mic, so it'd be easier for him to answer the first questions if there are any questions. And Jordan is still in the room too, so if you have come up with a national question that you would like to ask. I'm not seeing any questions. If you do have a question, you just simply need to type your question into the question box. Hit submit, we can ask that, or you can raise your hand if you have a microphone on your computer. You guys must have done a really good job of answered everything. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions. So, well, once again, would like to thank everybody for being on the webinar this afternoon. Hopefully it has been informative and beneficial to you. We are just under an hour, and so we did record this, so everyone will be able to view this again later. You will also be receiving an email for everyone that signed up and was was on the webinar. You will get an email to ask questions on how this worked for you. Please let us know so we can continue these and how they're working.
All right. Well, thank you, Jay. And I, too, would like to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon and hope you found this informative and useful. And I guess I'd just also add, if sometimes when you're out doing something later, you think of a question or something comes up, please don't hesitate to give us a call here at the Government Relations Department. We'll be glad to answer any questions you might have. Just for things to look forward to, at least on the state side, Jordan talked a little bit about the budget issues on the national side. Again, I mentioned senators have until the end of the week for priority bills designation from here on out. They're finishing up hearings next week. They'll be going to all-day sessions and be focusing primarily on budget issues and priority bills, so that our focus will narrow a little bit at that point in time, and we'll have another webinar, I'm sure, at some time to focus on those issues a little bit. So, but thank you, and anything else, Jay, that we...
Yeah, just a couple of things, just kind of some updates on some things that are coming up, not next week. Well, next week, actually, the governor's fly-around is going to be going to Tecumseh and then Omaha and then up in the Wayne County area. So stay tuned if you are available on those days that you can go out and get a chance to visit with the governor. We'd love to see you out there on that. Also, then the following week, we've got a couple of regional meetings that we will be partaking. The 25th, we were going to be in Seward. We're going to be talking about some state planning and also some Farm Bill questions will come up there along with another legislative update, but we will be doing that in person. And then also on the 28th of March, we will be in Norfolk doing some drought webinar or drought seminar type things, and then also a legislative update meeting as well. Jordan did mention that we are planning to co-host a webinar on the SPCCC ruling with EPA, and that hopefully will be that week towards the end of March or the first part of April. So stay tuned. Stay tuned on that so we can get that going. So with that, once again, thank you everybody for being on the webinar this afternoon.